It'll take a few seconds to get everybody in.
All right, it's time. Let's get started. Gary, what's up next?
Commissioners, this is your afternoon policy session. And our first policy session, I actually don't see all the staff yet, but I'll talk slow,
We're
is
working on it.
updating on rulemaking for House Bill 2001 from the year 2019 related to middle housing, and House Bill 2003, also from the year 2019, related to needed housing. We have the team from Transportation and Development, Martha Fritzy, and I'm not sure who else, Martha, who's on your team, so I'll let you kick it off, please.
Oh, hi. So Jennifer Hughes is here, I think mostly listening, and we're waiting for Chris Story, if we could just for one more minute, perhaps.
He's coming.
Okay. He's going to kick off the presentation for us today.
Is this the three of you that you need in here for this?
Yes. Can't hear anything.
Chris is here.
Okay. So I think we're ready to go. Chris, I told them you were going to start off for us.
Yeah, no, I am. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you from a virtual location. This is a briefing that may seem like something out of the Wayback Machine, because way back, slightly over a year ago, the hot topic at the legislature was House Bill 2001 and its companion bill, House Bill 2003, that was focused on the increasing ways to increase the capacity of our system to provide housing. And the strategy was to encourage the development of middle housing units, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. This was the House Speaker's bill, and it did make it through. And it had a fair number of components to it, a fair number of moving parts that required DLCD to promulgate some rules to implement. To do so, DLCD looked to their staff and said, come up with some rules. Their staff created an advisory committee. So I'll note this advisory committee that Martha and I have been participating on is not to the actual committee, it's to staff, state staff, who is then providing their own recommendations out of the feedback they're getting from the advisory committee, in addition to their own professional judgment about what those rules should be. There are three major components that are being reviewed and promulgated. The first and probably the most relevant is the model code that is going to be covered by Martha in great detail. There's the infrastructure-based time extension program, and then there's the implementation of House Bill 2003 with its housing production strategy components. So what we thought we would do is walk through each of those sections discreetly and sort of have an opportunity to have dialogue around those topics specifically as we go through, and then also reserve time at the end for more general questions, if that works for everybody. And with that sort of brief overview, I'm going to turn over to Martha to talk about the model housing code.
Thanks. And I think before I get into the model code, I want to talk a little bit about the schedule. As Chris noted, this is complex and there are a lot of moving parts. And I tried to pull out and highlight for you what I think are the most important dates to remember, which is on page 3 of your policy session worksheet. At the end of this month, the Commission, LCDC, is going to hold a final hearing to adopt the rules around the medium cities model code. And medium cities are those that have between 10,000 and 25,000 population outside of the Portland metro area, and they're required to allow for a duplex on every urban lot that allows for a detached single family dwelling. The Clackamas County is not considered a medium city. Clackamas County falls into the large and metro cities, even though we're a county, rules. The reason that the medium cities code is relevant to us, though, is that in addition to having to allow duplexes on every lot that allows for a detached single family dwelling in the urban area, we will be required to allow for some additional types of middle housing. And so the rules that are written for the medium cities are in all likelihood going to be the same for us. There will just be more rules for us. And so at the end of this month, those rules for the duplexes should be adopted by LCDC. And there's going to be a first reading of the infrastructure-based time extension rules that Chris is going to get into with you. Those are intended for adoption at the beginning of August. And so we have right now a fairly small window of opportunity if we want to provide any sort of feedback or testimony in addition to what Chris and I have been discussing and advocating for at the various meetings. Moving forward in September, there will be the first hearing and reading of the large and metro cities model code and associated rules. And again, those are the ones that the county is going to have to use to implement House Bill 2001 in our urban areas. And then November is the final reading and adoption of that. So there's a little bit longer time frame, but we do expect by the end of August to actually see the draft that they are proposing for adoption. And so we will stay on top of that. But again, this summer seems to be our window of opportunity if we want to provide any additional feedback. And so I sit on the Model Code TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, which Jennifer knows I like to call the rack McTac because it's the McTac to the rack. But anyway, I sit on the Model Code TAC, and basically we're tasked with looking at two different things. One is the Model Code, and the other is what's called the minimum compliance standards. And without getting into a whole lot of boring detail, the Model Code is actually intended to be a plug and play code that they are creating for jurisdictions should they choose to adopt it. And also for jurisdictions if they are unable to adopt anything by the deadline, then it just will automatically apply to them. In addition to the Model Code, there are some rules that are being written. And so the understanding is not every jurisdiction is going to plug and play the Model Code. There will be some standards, some parameters put around what local jurisdictions can and cannot do in their own codes to implement the middle housing in House Bill 2001. And so those are really where a lot of my focus has been, because I think there's an understanding that what we are going to be doing in Clackamas County in the urban area is most likely not going to be just plugging in the Model Code. We certainly would use it for reference, but we are going to do a large public outreach effort and write our own rules that fit our various urban areas. And so as we have worked through this, there are a couple things that have jumped out at both Chris and me. And one of them is this, this struggle with allowing flexibility. And as we have gone down this road with the various advisory committees, there's been a struggle because there seems to be some feeling from certain people in DLCD that the rules need to be very tight and not allow a lot of flexibility so jurisdictions don't try to take advantage of it, and that they will indeed implement House Bill 2001 in a fair and equitable way. But the thing is, and what we have been advocating for at both the RAC and the TAC levels, is that jurisdictions need to have some flexibility in the rules in order to take account local conditions and in order to work with community members so we can find workable alternatives. And so that has constantly been a struggle. There are many other jurisdictions that have been advocating for the same thing, and I think that DLCD hears it and is struggling with it a bit too. And so we will continue to keep advocating for more flexibility within the administrative rules. Another big issue that's come up is parking, which is not really a surprise. Parking always seems to be a hot issue. There has been a push to really, really limit the amount of off-street parking that jurisdictions can require, to the point where some of the model codes drafts have no off-street parking requirement. I don't think that is likely to change, but what the concern is, at least on the end of a lot of local jurisdictions, is what are the parameters around the minimum compliance. And so it is very likely that what is going to happen is that local jurisdictions will be told they cannot require more than a certain number of off-street parking spaces per dwelling unit. That does not mean you couldn't allow for more if a developer wants to build more, or if the market will bear that, and that's okay. But it does concern us a little bit at the staff level, how few parking spaces are being proposed. Off-street parking spaces are being proposed in the minimum compliance. So I guess I should be more specific. For a duplex, currently it says a jurisdiction may not require more than 2 parking spaces. And that's 1 per unit, which might be fairly reasonable. But as you get to some of the higher housing types, the triplexes, the fourplexes, again, they're looking at between, 1 per unit or fewer, and that does impact our streets, and it does impact the transportation system potentially. So that's a concern, and once again, we are absolutely advocating for more flexibility and a reasonable standard for parking.
And if I can, just to clarify, when we talk about the model code, the overarching philosophy behind House Bill 2001, and it's sort of clearly stated in the statute, is that local jurisdictions were not doing enough to allow the production of these middle housing units. So there's a kind of presumption of a problem that flows through a lot of this discussion. The model code is available as a backstop, but the statute actually asks for the cities that are impacted to adopt their own code that will implement the middle housing, and if they fail to do so, then this model code will sort of come in over the top and be imposed on them as part of the review process to see if the local jurisdiction has appropriately followed the statute. You get into these minimum standards of what is required at the state level for a city to have been deemed to comply with the statute. So there's a lot of dialogue of basically the state's acting like a super land use board, coming in trying to dictate what kind of parking you're going to have in your city. And that can look very different if you're in an area that has mass transit or if you're not, and what that all means. So again, Martha and I and quite a few people have been pushing the idea that there needs to be discretion delegated to the local jurisdictions to try and make this happen. But there's a tension there because there's a fear that local jurisdictions will use that as a rationale for not following through on, you might say, the policy impetus behind the bill, which is to increase housing production and allowing these housing units to happen. So it's unresolved at this point. I'm sorry, Commissioner Bernard, you're muted.
I had 2 people have questions. You want to wait, or is now a good time?
I think
Is it specifically related to parking? Or
that would, for me, that would be included, but I'll wait until you're done with your presentation.
okay, I only have one more topic, and then I think
Okay, go ahead.
we can take some questions about the model code if that's okay.
You bet.
And so the last one really is, and I'm not going to do this justice because it really is one of the biggest, most important and most controversial topics. And it has to do with the way the language in House Bill 2001 is written. It is very clear that a jurisdiction must allow a duplex on every lot that is zoned for a detached single-family dwelling. But then when it talks about the triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, cottage clusters, it says that you need to allow it in areas that allow detached single-family dwellings. And so for quite a long time, we've all been trying to figure out what does in areas mean. And so both advisory committees have finally tackled this question or started to tackle this question. And it remains a little bit unclear. DLCD staff has proposed one of two ways to look at it, which I attempted to describe in the worksheet. One of them, called the whittle down method, essentially starts with an assumption that all of these housing types are allowed everywhere, and they are allowed to whittle down and essentially take away areas where you are not going to allow it, versus what they call the balloon method, where the assumption is it's not allowed anywhere and you need to identify areas where it is going to be allowed. The way it's been portrayed is that it would largely be in relation to transit or in vicinity of other commercial areas, or where higher density has already been introduced. And so it's pretty clear from the way that these conversations have gone that the way that the rules are heading is this whittle down method, which would essentially mean you start with an assumption that in every urban zone that allows detached single family dwellings, all of these various middle housing types are allowed, and there are certain ways you can demonstrate that it's not maybe not appropriate to be allowed in sub areas within those zones. And how that actually is going to happen still remains a little bit unclear. It's very clear that there are certain things you can't exclude, goal protected areas, natural resource areas. And there is some conversation about infrastructure constrained areas, although that's very narrowly defined, and I'm not sure exactly how that would play out. And then there is this conversation about how jurisdictions could demonstrate through some sort of evidence other areas should be whittled away. And it remains unclear, and probably will until we see some more structure around what they're proposing for the rules. It remains unclear how that is going to look. And so that is something that is a little concerning as we near the end of this process. And it's certainly something that we would stay on top of and try to figure out exactly how that would impact certainly our urban area, but also, all of the cities in the metro area are going to have to comply with these as well. And so that's really the highlights of what's coming out of the model code, at least what I think are the biggest and most controversial pieces. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or if Chris has something else to add that I missed.
Okay. Well, first, Paul, Ken, and then Martha.
So, no, I think, Chris, your comments earlier, that's why I raised my hand. Your comments about how this all came to be and how it's progressing, and presumptions. I think it was pretty well, at least here in the region, the Tri-County region, that we've had a decades-long issue, or the region has, with cities that weren't really honoring goal 10 as far as accommodating housing. So it was not so much the counties as it was the cities. And I find it, well, I'll digress a little bit. So when I came on the commission years ago, 10 years ago, it was very clear that the legislature doesn't want to touch land use. When they stay away from land use, the legislature is not a good place to do planning and so on. And so I heard that over and over and over. I heard that from legislators over and over and over. So voila, here we are. And we've got legislation that's delving into land use, which is kind of complex, just a little bit. And every area is different. And we here in Clackamas County have areas where, oddly, most of the density in the area, or the highest density areas, happen to be close to or in unincorporated areas, particularly along McLaughlin and a little bit along near the town center, where a lot of multifamily housing is. So with all that said, and Martha, you touched on it with regards to urban services, there are areas where in the county where there's adequate and sometimes rich urban services in some areas. In some areas, it's really just this is the opposite, where there's virtually none. As a matter of fact, even some of it could be defined as no, not saying near failing, but in poor condition. And if we're going to start adding a substantial amount of housing and population, and I'll just use Jennings Lodge, for example, because they sent us a letter. I think staff, everyone saw that letter. And because there's really a lot of unsafe areas as it relates to sidewalks, as it relates to drainage, you know, totally identified as severely underserved with regards to parks, a number of areas that those ought to at least rise to some level of saying, you know, that it's, you know, recognizing as bad enough as it is today, and if you want to add the population, it's even going to exacerbate it. There's got to be some, and my question is, how do we get the flexibility to say, you know, in certain areas, until that infrastructure is really added or improved, it's not really appropriate. And put the really, I won't say the monkey, but the whole idea of this initially was that it was on the cities who are, quote unquote, and the LOC has taken this position, the ultimate provider of urban services. And, you know, I could say, I can't think of a city in Clackamas County per se that's really failing in that regard. I think they're all doing pretty well with urban service provision. It's the unincorporated areas that are perhaps as identified in that area. So how do we not exacerbate infrastructure issues, recognize the message in 2001 that started in the first place, and then also the messages coming from areas around the state, particularly, well, in this case, Jennings Lodge, where you know, there's really not the infrastructure capacity.
So I can start off with this by first acknowledging the absolute truth of what you're saying, in that the urban unincorporated areas are an exception that was difficult to address. Both Clackamas County and Washington County were continuing to press the point that, as the larger dialogue was talking about what cities were doing, we were pointing out that counties were getting sort of pulled into that same orbit because of our large urban unincorporated areas. And the second, I believe I can answer most of your questions in the next portion of the presentation, which deals with the specific provisions of the House bill around infrastructure-based time extensions.
Okay. So, okay, I think you thought you were all done, completed your presentation.
We're done with just the first section, which is the model codes. Boy, we've got more to go. Oh, let me tell you.
Okay. All right. So if you could expand on that at the right time, Chris, I'd appreciate it. Or Martha.
I can, and then Martha.
Thank you. My questions are related around the same things that Commissioner Savas has raised. Oak Grove Jennings Lodge area is what, about 80,000 people. This moved kind of to the center of my radar because of some conversations with citizens that live in the area. The infrastructure issue seems to be a major one, and parking is a good example of that. If we don't have the level of public transportation in that region to sufficiently serve the population that's there now. And now we're talking about adding additional population, but not allowing them to park cars, essentially. Without the public transportation, people are going to have to go in cars, and most people nowadays, husbands and wives, both work. That's 2 cars per living unit, at least. I don't know how you square this circle. We already know in our own documents through NCPRD that we're underserved in open space in that area, and we are underserved in parks in that area. The one saving grace maybe in the whole thing is that there is an opportunity for a time extension until these infrastructure issues can be addressed. So I'm laying my concerns out on the table, and I'll wait for Chris and others to talk about that extension part of it. But from what I see, I don't see how we apply this new law without addressing those infrastructure issues first. And I don't know how we do that, given the costs of those things at this point in time. I'll stop there and wait until staff can continue with their presentation.
Martha. You're on mute.
Got a question from a constituent that was concerned about our lack of understanding. HB 2001 impact section 2 4C. So as you move on in your conversation, we'll address that. Okay, but specifically someone has talked to me and said this is what their major concern is, that we are not understanding it. I don't think that's the case, but if you can help with that, that would be great. So it's section 2 4C, evidently of the bill.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead and
Right.
let's move on.
But let's move on.
I'll tell you what, so I will run through the infrastructure-based time extension process, and perhaps while I'm doing that, Martha, you can pull that particular section of the bill, and we'll make sure we answer that question for you, Commissioner Schrader.
Okay, great.
So this is in the next section of your packet. There is, so we have the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, or RAC, of which I'm a member, and then there's 3 subcommittees from that. And that Rulemaking Advisory Committee is only advisory to staff. And then of that Rulemaking Advisory Committee, there's 3 working groups breaking out from it. One is for the model code, and Martha is on that. And one is on the infrastructure-based time extension process. And in addition to being on the primary committee, I'm also on that subcommittee, as is Westland's assistant city manager. So Clackamas County does have some good representation there. The key infrastructures that are of concern and specified in the bill are water, sewer, transportation, and surface water. And you may note that there is an absence of one type of infrastructure that is normally included in that list, because it would otherwise map up with what we can charge for SDCs, which is parks. It is not an eligible infrastructure issue to talk about a time extension for parks. So open space, parks, NCPRD, the statute does not allow that to be a rationale for asking for an extension. So immediately some of the concerns that were raised from Jennings Lodge fall sort of beyond the scope of what the rules are even going to be willing to address. So you have.
So which statute?
House Bill 2001.
I'll say, so in House Bill 2001, you say that there's actually, that's excluded from consideration.
Yeah, it lists, there's only 4 infrastructure that can be considered for the extension: surface water, drinking water, wastewater, and transportation.
And do you recall where in the bill it says that?
I don't, I'm sorry, not in front of me, but we can certainly dig that up and give it to you.
Certainly 2 of them apply.
Yes, and there's parking is as a sort of subcomponent of the transportation concern is significant. The sort of other overarching item that I would flag for you as part of this process is that the rulemaking is very specifically focused on the impact of the change in zoning, which is to say the impact from putting a single family housing unit on a parcel versus a duplex or triplex or quadplex on a parcel. It is not intended, and the rules are going to be written, it appears, in such a way that it will not address generally existing deficiencies. It is only intended to address the impacts of the increase of demand on the system because of the upzoning. So in areas where we have, you might say, already acknowledged deficiencies, those generally will not be acceptable rationales for not implementing the upzoning, because there was a fair discussion around this. There is already an existing land use process for saying that you can't add anything more to an existing failing system, and it's called a moratorium. So the rules are basically saying, if you think it's that bad, declare a moratorium because the general infrastructure doesn't work. If you think it's going to be bad only because of the increased density, and you can demonstrate that from the difference between having a triplex on a parcel versus having a single family home on a parcel, and you can demonstrate that, then you would be eligible for the extension. That
So making it worse doesn't count.
well, you might say they're sort of begging the question of, if you're willing to make it worse by letting people build a single family house there, how much worse is it going to be by putting in a duplex? Does that strain the system, the infrastructure, that much more? Because again, as Commissioner Savas noted, there was a general perception that many cities were not taking seriously their Goal 10 obligations to allow housing production to take place. So you might say the delta of impact between what a single family residence would do and what middle housing would do becomes the key sort of fact that you have to articulate to be able to qualify for this infrastructure-based time extension. And I think that starts to get to some of the questions that we heard from Jennings Lodge and earlier in this dialogue. I do also want to flag that the excuse me, the timeline for these sorts of applications is really quick. Like 1 year from now is when entities in Clackamas County would have to apply for this infrastructure-based extension. That is right around the time they would also just be adopting their model code, right? They're upzoning. So in many ways, it becomes an exercise in planning and estimation of what that impact would be. And so the specifics, then you start breaking down the rules about what kind of assumptions you even make about how quickly people are going to show up, what kind of density you're going to experience, what kind of load they're going to put onto the system. And this subcommittee went through several case studies of cities in Oregon that have basically experimented with upzoning themselves, the most relevant being the city of Portland, and seeing what kind of increase in densification they experienced. And the short answer was, from an infill perspective, it wasn't that much. It certainly wasn't so much that they saw huge upswings in demand on their infrastructure. It certainly is higher in greenfield development, where you can allow new development that is specifically planned around middle housing development. You saw growth rates at a higher percentage there than you did as infill. Then we got into a discussion of what would be considered an impact on the system, and the struggle that you run into for two of the infrastructures right away, wastewater and drinking water. Those are sized for, you might say, maximum demand, right? You don't build a pipe for the average every day. You build it for when you really need it, when there's a high demand on it. The marginal impact of adding a duplex demand on a wastewater system or a drinking water system versus a single family is usually de minimis compared to the size of the pipes that are being designed to handle that area, often because they're also designed to handle areas further downstream or upstream, depending on which way the water's flowing. So unless there's very rare cases, those two are unlikely to move the needle from an infrastructure capacity standpoint. We did a survey. Part of my role on the committee was to help represent the Special Districts Association of Oregon, of which Wes is a member. And the vast majority of the utilities basically said, for a water or wastewater standpoint, we don't think this is really going to move the needle. Transportation, it could. Surface water, it could, because you're materially increasing the amount of impervious surface that you are providing on a lot. But generally, it is going to be up to the individual utilities, which is either run by the city or a special district partner for that city or urban unincorporated area, to make the case that that infrastructure impact is specific, demonstrable, and not only will have an impact, but the impact happens now within the next 3 years and is resolvable within a short period of time thereafter. Because part of the application process for the extension is to propose a solution to the problem. So you can bring that increased densification online as soon as reasonably possible. that's sort of a broad overview, but I feel like there's a lot of questions queuing up, so I'll pause there.
Well, I want to go back, Chris, and I got the bill open and I read it again, and I got ORS 195-065 open and breezed through that. And I'm not an attorney, I'm not a land use expert, but it seems that not everything we've done or do or that's spelled out in 195-065 is fulfilled, right? I mean, we haven't fulfilled adequate urban services, correct?
I would never claim that.
Right, right. So, I mean, there's obviously some conflicts where, the bill might say, or maybe there's probably even disagreement with what the bill says, HB 2001, and what the statute, what the statutes say. And I know that somehow, as we navigate, as I have tried to navigate these over the years, I hear this, well, there's not the resources to do that, and there's time to do that. The 2040 plan, it's not 2040 yet. You still got years to accomplish those things, so on. So I want to go back. I'm just going to build, for the sake of argument right now, just build on what Commissioner Humberson was pointing out as far as transportation and parking. And if we want to use the McLaughlin corridor, for example, we have actually adequate transit service up and down the boulevard, and we actually have, to some degree, in all practicality, a reasonable highway that goes up and down there. So that highway is there, and that transit link is there. That's adequate. Is what we don't have as far as transit for populations or new housing that doesn't allow parking. What we don't have is actually linkages, sidewalks, shuttle services to get that last mile service to the transit line, right? And that is the biggest issue in Clackamas County. We have currently underway a transit study that is identifying major gaps where there's no service and or severely underserved and unserved in different categories. So I think that, and unfortunately, even this getting there together 2020 or whatever it is, the transportation measure we're going to talk about here in a little bit, it doesn't even accommodate any of those gaps. There's nothing. There's no shuttle service provided in this area. There's shuttle services being talked about, but all it really does is just build on existing transit lines. It doesn't build or give what the community's been asking for. Many communities asking for a long time. Transit where we don't have it, transit where we need it. So that transportation and parking issue is huge. And running more transit up and down the corridor, no matter what kind of transit you use, isn't going to fix it. Isn't going to fix the problem. If the last mile is not there, if there's not sidewalks, if there's not all that infrastructure to safely move people conveniently to the transit line. So where is this headed on the transportation side of this?
Sure. And I will say you are providing a very concise recap of hours of conversation. Advisory committee. So the infrastructure-based time extension committee, which I'm on, has met 7 times, and the meetings are a minimum of 3 hours each. And the last couple have ran 4 hours, which is awesome, by the way, to have Zoom meetings like that. And the short answer is we kept getting pushed back to solve the problem defined by the statute. Because the statute doesn't, purport to address a lot of these issues. It purports basically to add another wrinkle to the conversation. And the wrinkle to the conversation is, we think one of the problems that has been here, and this is not my opinion, this is the statute's sort of overall thrust. One of the problems has been that cities have been reluctant to allow this middle housing component, and they're not taking actions necessary to sufficiently increase the number of housing units. Therefore, we're just going to make this change, and we're going to force them to do it. But then the other mechanisms remain where they were before that bill was passed. How do people achieve, appropriate service levels for the folks that need access to mass transit. They need safe paths to schools. They're all still there, and this bill doesn't purport to answer it, which is why the rules quickly became narrowed down to just that degree of impact caused by the intensification of use from middle housing, rather than trying to create a venue for addressing the shortfalls of the infrastructure generally. And that was a pretty long debate. And frankly, it went both ways. You had folks like Martha and I saying you need to give the local jurisdictions more discretion and flexibility to address these types of issues. And you had fair housing advocates and others saying cities have systemically excluded people from neighborhoods, and the state needs to come over the top and just dictate everything. So the conversation was flowing multiple ways, and this was sort of the compromise position, and the one most grounded in the statute, which is if you can prove that it's being made worse because of this densification, which means it's most certainly going to be in areas rather than citywide, then an infrastructure-based time extension would be appropriate.
It's amazing, but they've just applied this all over everywhere when it's probably much more specific. I could take the example of Happy Valley and not Milwaukee, and probably not Oregon City so much, but they should have just, I'm sure that when you get to Bend, that's probably very true, but it isn't generally true. That's the bad part about this.
Interestingly, one of the case studies we looked at was the city of Eugene. And one of the city councilors for the city of Eugene is on the advisory committee. And he noted that the city tried to do some degree of middle housing encouragement and some upzoning. And getting back to Martha's point, they used the not whittle down, but sort of balloon approach of trying to identify areas where they could add that upzoning. And the conclusion was they were not very successful. And that was actually one of the points.
Why?
The statute to try and go over the top on many.
Probably not the investors. I mean, you have to convince an investor to build the product.
But
Is that
from local zoning, there was still a fair amount of NIMBYism that was like, oh yeah, we definitely need to do that, but not in my neighborhood. And that other city is where it should go.
So Sonia and then Paul?
Yeah, so Chris and Martha, I have a big picture question. I'm just wondering if the conversation has changed at all on this policy and during the rulemaking due to COVID, because it seems that density is, contrary. It's not so good when you're dealing with a pandemic. I'm just curious if that's come up and if anybody's rethinking this implementation now, or any comments along those lines.
The issue, you might say, the issue came up and people flagged that many of the policies that we're pursuing, including, you might say, a tight urban growth boundary and focus on mass transit and focus on, densification of housing units, all don't seem great in a pandemic. And the short answer was, we're not willing to use this forum as a way to relook at that. If you want to talk about that, go talk to UGB or go talk to the legislature, because the LCD can't really do anything on its own. That's a great point.
Paul?
Well, I'm pretty familiar with Eugene and very familiar with the county itself, and their population has really gone up pretty substantially. And really what's happening is that, not unlike Clackamas County, is that the rural cities getting out and far from the center of town are the ones that are growing. That's where a lot of the people want to live. And that's where housing is more affordable than it is closer to the center hub like it is here. So, knowing that also applies to other counties. So the reality is that the urban growth boundary is really, in a sense, really a fallacy of sorts, in that it's actually drawing people on the other side of it, and like our rural cities are just bursting with growth and housing. And actually, I think they just built the last piece of Malala they can. or near their capacity. And that'll continue to happen. So it's going to continue to exacerbate the transportation system problem that we have. And, when you have people that lived in Clackamas County that moved to Polk County, just out by West Salem area, because the housing is affordable there, and they're driving in the region every day to go to work. That's an example of, drive till you
qualify.
Drive till you qualify. That's it. Drive till you qualify. It's happening all over the place. So the one thing I want to note, I don't have much else to add to this, is that, I know we emulated this off of what Minneapolis was doing, but we got to remember that Minneapolis is a city, it's not a state. And they didn't implement that whole policy statewide. We did. And I guess we'll just have to see how this pans out. But I don't know how we're going to encourage growth in the cities, frankly. How's that going to happen effectively?
I have no answer to that, but I do want to check in with Martha, who I think may have an answer for Commissioner Schrader.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm sorry, I was not able to raise my hand for some reason, so I apologize. So I believe the reference that you were talking about, section 2.4, is the section that talks about where the provisions in House Bill 2001 do not apply. And it lists cities with population of 1,000 or fewer. These are for the larger and metro area cities. Lands not within an urban growth boundary, lands that are not incorporated and also lack sufficient urban services as defined in ORS 195. Lands that are not zoned for residential use. I'm gonna start paraphrasing. Lands that are not incorporated and are not zoned and are under an interim zoning designation, think Damascus here, that maintains the land's potential for planned urban development. I believe it's that area that you were referring to, Commissioner Schrader, and if I had to guess, it would be the one that talks about the lack of sufficient urban services. And I don't know that I have a very good answer. Maybe Chris can help me out with this. I don't know that the also lack sufficient urban services as defined in ORS 195 has really been clearly defined through the rulemaking. I do know there have been some definitions about what they're calling infrastructure deficient, or was it infrastructure constrained areas, that simply say they do not have urban services. And so I don't know if that is an intent to define this area, but I think that we really need to think about what the definition of lack sufficient urban services is, because it very clearly says that this would not apply there.
Yeah, and I think that's what the question is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have anything else, Chris, about what the definition of also lack sufficient urban services is.
Well, I can't answer it in a general context, but I think I can offer an observation in the specific context of House Bill 2001, which is to say that if a county has designated an area as not eligible for development, period, because it lacks urban services, then it would be excluded from the scope or requirements of House Bill 2001. But if we are allowing single family development housing there, it would be very difficult to argue that there is sufficient urban services to allow single family development, but insufficient to allow housing units.
And for example, in our large unincorporated urban area, we have allowed single family housing development.
Right.
So that's going to be interesting. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay.
Are you guys done with your presentation?
I will give you a 30-second, I know we're almost out of time, so I will offer a 30-second summary of the third component of the bill, which is housing production strategies. There's a requirement from House Bill 2003 that cities, now this doesn't specifically apply to Clackamas, but I suspect you may get questions on this, so I wanted to make sure it was at least flagged to your attention. Develop a plan that they will then submit for review to DLCD about how they are going to increase the number of housing units coming online. The statute is framed in such a way that it presumes the cities will do all the concessions necessary, that there's nothing that's going to come from Metro, there's nothing that's going to come from the state. It's unfortunate. In certainly my conversations, I was pointing out there are multiple things that the Metro and the state do that make it harder for cities to get housing production achieved that they might be wanting to achieve. But so this will include things like lowering or waiving SDCs, plan review fees, reducing the minimum standards for development that people experience as part of their application process overall. I'll also flag that there's been an extensive conversation between at all the committee levels, making sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of the overall approach and analysis. There was some tension about what that meant, frankly, when we talked about infrastructure investments and whittle down and balloon up. Some people were saying this could be an excuse to avoid investment in a neighborhood, and others were saying this could lead to gentrification. So where does it fall on the lens of whether it's good or bad? It's unclear, but there will be a component in any of these sort of applications, both the adoption of zoning rules in infrastructure-based extension and in the housing production strategies. Each will have a component where the local jurisdiction is going to be asked to consider in a narrative form how their actions are impacting diversity, equity, and inclusion.
All right, Ken.
So in listening to your discussion and reading the statute and all the rest of it, if I get this correct, if we do nothing, they impose their model rule upon us.
Right.
And to do something, they fenced us into the point that even though we have infrastructure needs that are inadequate at this point in time, nonetheless, we have to comply and increase the amount of housing, even though the impact will be greater on our insufficient infrastructure, which is transportation and stormwater at this point. I mean, that's the message I am hearing, and that essentially there's little or no actual honest flexibility.
I would say that there is some possibility of being able to demonstrate impacts locally. You might say zones where there are particular impacts that would be materially exacerbated by increased density. I'm just trying to flag for you, just to be transparent, I think the bar is going to be relatively high to be able to prove that. Because I strongly suspect that if we talk about generally the lack of infrastructure and anything else, the response from the state, from DLCD, is going to be, then you should consider declaring a general moratorium in that area until you remedy those infrastructure impairments.
All right, so Paul has a question, but I need to leave. And Martha, you're in charge. I'll be back when I'm off the phone with the governor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Chris, just building on that, as you were saying, and then you finally said the M word. The M word being moratorium. I mean, and obviously, Oregon City did
Stop.
it did like 2 or 3, 4 areas of moratorium for their drainage issue, right? Until they resolve that. So they can do it in a very localized sense and not apply it to the entire city.
Yes.
And going back to the transportation / parking and the argument that, well, geez, if you apply this standard where you need to have a minimum of X, let's just say is transportation, but you don't have that around you, then you can't build anything, right? Whether it's an ADU or whether it's a single family home. But in reality, it seems to me functionally that what's going to happen if there's no moratorium on a particular housing type, and we continue one way to continue is, okay, you build a single family home, you'll build it with a garage, you build it with or parking, and you build a structured parking for it, period. And then you can build that. And if you want to look at maybe multifamily housing, then they need to apply parking because there is no transit service, adequate transit service. So therefore, that requirement to build the parking, I think is elevated because of the very fact that you're forcing people to drive. And I think that's a lever, and I don't know how we apply it without trying to impose a moratorium. but maybe, can a moratorium be that there shall be no parking waived until such time as there's adequate transit options?
Fair question.
Certainly that would be I would say that the idea of parking waivers or minimum standards is going to be addressed in the adoption of the code, your design standards in your code. And I'm seeing Jennifer and Martha nod. There's going to be, minimum standards that we have for what those housing types are required to provide if they're allowed to develop. Because you have the zoning question of, could they happen in that zone? And then you're going to have the development review question of, what standards do they have to meet to be able to engage in a successful development? And that includes, adequate surface water management on the site, adequate parking, and, impacts from their transportation, SDCs, making sure that the traffic impact study shows that there's not going to be a critical failure somewhere in the system, et cetera, et cetera. So this is pushing forward, you might say, one hurdle that middle housing has had a challenge in clearing, which is the zoning, but it doesn't purport to just impose carte blanche that you have to just accept them and they can develop in any way they want to. Part of Jennifer and Martha's process is going to be to address some of those impacts, and I'll let them talk now.
I just wanted to do a process check. We already are over time by 10 minutes. So how much longer, colleagues, are we going to be doing this particular presentation?
Chair, we need to wrap it up right now because we have 3 more sessions and we have to stop at 4. So.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. So is there anything else that we need to discuss? And are we giving direction today? This is informational only.
Yes.
And I think that we're all sharing the same concerns about the burden that's going to be on our infrastructure and the lack of concern for that. So, okay, is there anything else? All right, Gary.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both of you for this.
Thank you, guys.
This was really informative.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. I think it is Metro 2020, am I correct?
No, we changed the schedule, commissioners, so we're putting the Metro transportation measure as last. So we're moving forward to 2020 small grant cycle.
Okay, great.
Bill from County Administration to present, and she's in the room. So Caroline, as soon as you unmute, please go ahead.
Okay.
Can you see me? Hear me? Great. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Administrator Schmidt. My name is Caroline Hill from County Admin. I am here today to discuss the 2020 small grant cycle. This is a follow-up from the issue session on June 9th, when you asked me to reach out to the small grants contacts to learn if and how they had been affected by COVID-19. This information would be used to guide this year's cycle. We kept the survey very simple and asked 3 questions. What service do you provide? In a couple of sentences, please describe how your organization has been affected by COVID-19 and what is your organization's greatest need. We received 40 responses and there were some clear trends in the responses. There was inability to provide services. This was due to having to close down their facility to comply with the governor's order of lack of volunteers. Cancellation of fundraising events, which resulted in extreme loss of revenue. Significant increase in requests for food. Providing access to services remotely, which resulted in substantial expenses to obtain technology. Given those responses, it is no surprise that the greatest need mentioned is money. Some additional comments of note including there are concerns about funding from the state, need for funding to assist with increased sanitation and PPE for staff and clients, and lack of donations. Based on the information gathered from the survey, staff has a few recommendations for the board today. We would like to recommend that we continue to give priority to those applicants serving the community prosperity collaborative areas. This is part of the Performance Clackamas goals, and it's imperative that we continue to move the board's goals forward. We also propose to continue to prioritize clear one-time expenses. The new recommendations deal with the need to fill an anticipated expense gap due to COVID-19. We want to encourage partnerships to increase community impact And lastly, I would like to offer that we would like to shorten the application period from 6 weeks to 4 weeks to allow for quicker disbursements of funds. I am open for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, any questions? I do not have the ability to see a raised hand, so if you just make a signal. Okay. All right, how about Ken and Sonia? Ken?
I was very appreciative of the way you set up the goals and making sure that it sticks with our collaboratives. So I'm good to go with it as presented. And I will give a motion whenever chair is ready for it.
Thank you. Sonia? Mr.
Yeah,
Fisher?
hey, Carolyn, I didn't hear the very first thing that you said with your recommendation. I think Martha coughed, and I just
Sorry.
missed the first thing. So if
The
you
very
could just
first
repeat
thing-
that, that'd be great.
Yeah, the very first thing is to continue to give priority to those applicants serving the community prosperity collaborative areas.
Got it. Thank you so much. Yeah, I will second Ken's motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's take the poll, please.
Chair Schrader, I have a comment, please.
All right, thank you.
I wonder, commissioners, if you'd like to consider adding a category that you would help serve communities of color who are impacted by COVID. That could be another category you could add, because as you know, communities of color are more greatly impacted by COVID, especially in Clackamas County and statewide. So you also could add that to one of your criteria for your small grant applications, if you agree.
As the mover of the motion, I accept it. How's
And
the second?
I will second that acceptance.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second with an amended motion. Any other discussion? If not, let's take the poll.
Okay. Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Humberston,
Aye.
Vice Chair Schrader.
Aye, it's approved. Great.
Great. Thank you
So
so much.
very great. Now are we moving on to the
Clackamas
Internet-
Broadband Express.
okay, let's do it.
So Caroline, thank you very much. Next is
Thank you,
Clackamas
Caroline.
Broadband Exchange. Clackamas Broadband Exchange grant opportunities. We have Dave Cummings and Duke Dexter from Technology Services to present. And we'll wait a moment for them to come into the room. All right. Still waiting. There's Dave and Duke. All right, please go ahead. Duke, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead and start up here. You guys, thank you so much for some time today. I know your schedule is very busy. In past conversations that we've had with the board, we talked about expanding broadband within the rural community to try and provide a better service for those rural communities. And in that, we were kind of out researching grants. And one of them, on a very short timeline, it kind of fell into our lap, and it's actually through the state of Oregon. It's a past program that they'd had before, but the state had received, I believe it was $280 million worth of CARE Act funding. 10 million of that has been placed in the broadband office, and they're putting that out of a grant. The grant itself is due this Thursday, the 2nd, by 5 p.m. And so we are looking at one of the areas. I think you remember a while back, we had received quite a few calls along the Colorado Road, which is roughly southeast of the city of Sandy. And so what we've looked at right now is if we partner with the city of Sandy or SandyNet, we would apply for the grant to get the funds to be able to buy the equipment needed, and then also to deploy the fiber along Colorado Road, and then to any resident that would want to sign up for that service. And so right now we have a rough estimate, but it's getting much more narrowed down, of $670,000. We've started creating our narrative. We've kind of looking at the application itself. The city of Sandy is on board with it. And so I am coming to you today to ask permission to be able to file this application, and then if awarded, basically move forward with the project and complete it.
Well, yeah, anyone have any questions? I do have a question when we're ready.
Well, I'll move to approve option number 2.
I'll second that.
So it's been moved and seconded, and here's the discussion that I want to point out. Is this the same? We had a conversation last week with our superintendents and our providers, and it essentially revolved around the fact that we have large numbers of families within school districts, plural, who do not have adequate internet access. Is it true that they will be applying for the same bucket of money? Because we had talked about collaborating with them. And if we move ahead with this right now, will we be perceived as bad actors because we're actually competing rather than collaborating? And I understand this is something that's been on the docket for a while, am I right? So is this the same pot of money, and will we be in conflict with our school systems?
So I'll respond to that. So from your call last week, it is the exact same pot of money that it was, I believe, Paul Hauer from Direct Link or Beaver Creek Telco. He was the one that was discussing that. And so it is the exact same pot of money. It is not the same location. He's looking at some different locations kind of closer to their service area, which would be around kind of the Canby service area. We specifically picked, in this particular project, we picked a road that has been or underserved for many years. And so that's why we picked this exact location of why we did. But you will kind of have to decide what that kind of looks like. I guess I don't feel that it's actually acting, showing any kind of poor faith. We are collaborating with another local telco and then providing a service that at this point, this area has not had for years.
So in your opinion, it would be providing access potentially for school children that so far in a school district that does not have adequate access right now?
That is correct. Actually, we've looked it up. On Colorado Road, there are 44 school children located on that road.
Okay. Any other questions?
We have Commissioner Savas.
Yes.
I just want to say that from what I'm hearing from some of our commissioners and other parts of the state is that this money will be oversubscribed. There'll be a lot of people applying for this. I don't know how will fare as either counties separately from school districts. Ideally, county school district partnerships might have a little bit better looking application. I'm going to guess, that if there's a partnership with that, that it might, might have a better chance of succeeding. However, it's $10 million. That's not chump change, but it's certainly, compared to the amount of money we need to spend to provide and meet our goal of the county, it is a very small amount of money, not even a down payment. So I'm happy to support this today, but I certainly look forward to a dialogue and how we talk about a business plan that we could submit to the federal government when we have a mega grant opportunity to actually fulfill a good chunk of the county. And I think the sooner we get that under the way, the better. But is that conversation going to be happening in the short term, Gary, or what?
Hopefully by the end of July, Commissioner. Yes, I'm still working with staff to get some information back before it comes before the board.
Okay. And I want to be able to, and I'll make this request. Emily's on vacation this week, but I made the request to sit down with the providers. I didn't want to mix up or confuse the conversation that Commissioner Humberston and Schrader were having with the school districts and the providers. But I have a proposal of sorts that I'd like to introduce at some point here in the near future. But I need to meet with the providers next. And I'd like to do that before that work session. So I don't know who can help me with that, but if Gary and Drenda can help me, that'd be great.
Yes, will do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I will move forward in support. However, I am going to ask our staff to please call the Superintendent Jada Ripley, if you wouldn't mind, let her know. And I'd like you to potentially do some more research of who that would be serving in the Sandy School District. You said 44. but I want to make sure that we are not seen as not being, kind of going to a meeting, talk about collaboration, and then suddenly we're kind of jumping into things. So I would appreciate you talking to them directly. I think that would be important for us to do. Give them a heads up that we're going for the grant. I would be glad to actually chat with them as well, but I do want to make sure we're keeping everybody informed, because this is an issue that's now becoming bigger because of COVID-19. So, okay. Yeah, Commissioner Fisher, yeah.
Yeah, I forget you can't see my hand raised.
No, I can't. I don't have
I
it.
want to support what Commissioner Schrader is saying, because it's very important that we work in collaboration on this issue with our other jurisdictional partners. So I'm not sure, Ken, if we want to amend that motion with these qualifications. I don't want to hold this up because we need to apply in order to be eligible, but at the same time, I do not want to step on toes. This issue is too important, and we've done too much relationship building. So I'm really.
So Commissioner, do you want to come up with a friendly amendment and see if the motion?
Well, I'm not opposed to an amendment, but this is in line with the direction that we gave tech services long time ago to find opportunities to partner with others who provide ISP, and we would be providing the CBX level of service.
Right.
So this is not inconsistent with also what we've talked about with the school districts and providers. And if there's an opportunity there also, I'm sure that staff will grab a hold of it and see if we can provide a partnership there too. This just happens to be the one that's available at the moment. So
yeah, I know. Sure. Well, and you see the context has changed, because of COVID-19. And also, remember, that's why I asked, it's the same pot of money. So even though we've had it in the back burner for, we've been moving it forward, the context and how we're reaching out for partnerships has kind of changed. So I would like to let them know and be aware.
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, all right. And you don't believe we need an amendment that this conversation will be public record and will allow us to move forward and have a further conversation with them to let them know we're doing this?
Well, we could amend the motion and simply say we had asked staff to also reach out to the school districts and the providers in the other school districts and see if there's an opportunity for additional partnerships.
Okay, so that is an amendment?
Yeah, call that an amendment. I'm okay with that.
Do we have a second for that? And are we clear with what this means? Do we have to restate the motion?
No, the motion was for option number 2, and directing staff to reach out to the school districts and other providers in the other school districts and see if there's some opportunities for partnerships there also.
Okay, we got a second?
Yeah, I would second, but I'm still concerned, Martha, with your original concern about us stepping over what other partners may be wanting to apply for. So I kind of think a conversation like you had initially suggested is in order before we apply, just to give them a heads up and to see.
Okay.
Well, we're on a timeline for application, so it's,
yeah, we are at a deadline. Paul, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Chair, thank you. I just want to correct me. I just presume that maybe coming out of this, the meeting that you and Ken had, Martha, with the school districts, that maybe this was that this was all incorporated together, but it sounds like it's separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does seem like it's separate. Yeah.
So if it is separate, and that's becoming very clear to me now, I'm seeing heads nod up and down, then that's very little time for staff if the deadline's Thursday to actually do all that work. And I can see that we don't want to, destroy or burn any bridges or whatnot. And we probably don't want to. What was the outcome of that? Help me with that. What was the outcome out of that meeting with the school districts and the providers? I mean, would you talk about grant? grants at that point in time?
We talked about collaboration. Nothing specific came up.
Nothing specific
Nothing
came out of that
specific came up.
conversation. You know, the providers recognize the need is there. The schools have made it clear that they have the need, but there was no offer to do anything.
No, we
At
haven't
this
gotten
point.
that far yet. This was a preliminary conversation. My concern is that we want to be seen as collaborators and not jump ahead. But the issue we're dealing with right now is that there is a deadline to be met.
Right, so I might ask maybe Duke or someone, or maybe someone else has the answer. So if a school district was to apply in Clackamas County for this grant, what would it look like? What would they be doing? Because they're not infrastructure providers. So what opportunities does the grant, scope of the grant allow a school district to do versus us, so that we're not competing? Or are we competing?
Oh, yeah, so I don't know. I don't know specific ones. What I have heard is some school districts had, again, kind of just through contacts, that some of the school districts may apply to buy more of those hotspots. So kind of a temporary fix, if you will, to buy more T-Mobile or Verizon or AT&T hotspots to provide to students that don't have adequate broadband at their homes to be able to do kind of distance learning and that kind of stuff. From an infrastructure type grant, I don't believe that these school districts will be going out for anything because, again, they're not a provider, they're not infrastructure type owner when it comes to fiber or cables.
Yeah, and I imagine, I guess, if we just take our county hats off for a minute, just sit back as caring and concerned citizens of the county or the state, that the amount of money that our grant, or not the amount of money, but the amount of people benefiting if we were to get the grant awarded, or the school children awarded, would be 44, you said, right? You got to identify 44.
There are 44 children that are registered along Colorado Road.
Right, and the other question is, how many hotspots can the school district buy for that same amount of money? And obviously, it sounds to me maybe like the school district could probably help more kids with this temporary hotspot thing. We with the 444. So in essence, I see not a conflict, but a competitive aspect, and maybe that's what for the grant, the provider or the grant people who actually do the awarding can actually wrestle with. I can see a tough call there, but a compromise. I don't see we're stuck per se, but I'm just wondering if maybe the amendment to be made to the motion is that staff reach out to the school districts and check, or JADA, and check and see if there's any concerns with us applying for this grant, and if not, proceed.
I've already reached out to Clackamas ESD and working on a letter of support from them for us applying to the grant.
Okay, and that's forthcoming?
Yes, I'm working on that right now.
Okay.
But we haven't heard yet, though, whether they're okay with that.
Well, I called Clackamas ESD and said, would they provide a letter of support? And they would say yes. They wanted us to provide a little bit of narrative of what we've got going on, or kind of the body, and then they would take that, put it on their letterhead, and then send it in for a letter that we will attach for our application if we're allowed to apply.
Okay.
Yeah, well, if they are providing a letter of support, I think our whole conversation is a non-issue, actually.
Thank you.
Well, that's actually, yeah, I wish we had, gentlemen, we had started with that, but I would agree if there's a letter of support.
Yeah, my apologies.
That's all right. That's all right. But I had to raise the question because I want to make sure we're maintaining good relationships with this. So does that mean, Commissioner Fisher, are you ready to second?
Yeah, if they're providing a letter of support, I think we go forward.
Okay,
and do good
great.
work. So I'll just second the original motion.
Okay, great. And we have a public record that we want to collaborate with our school districts.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay.
Absolutely. I apologize I couldn't get on for some reason right away. Finally, Brenda allowed me on. We're just trying to find ways to get funding without hurting anybody else so that we can expand this fiber backbone. So we appreciate anything that you can do for us. We're just really grasping for anything we can get right now. And Duke's doing a tremendous job of going out there and finding this stuff and communicating with the schools.
Okay.
So we really appreciate it. And
So-
Paul, do you like my Westphalia behind me?
Yeah, I was admiring that, by the way.
That was my last restoration.
Nice, it looks
Where-
beautiful.
Thank
Yeah, I
you.
was going to say, where do I get one of those? Anyway, we have a motion and a second. Shall we take the poll?
Yes, thank you. To clarify, we're back to the original motion to
Motion? Mhm.
Correct,
approve option 2, and there are no amendments. Is that correct?
correct.
Okay.
Right.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Humberston,
Aye.
Vice Chair Schrader.
Aye, it's approved. Thank you, gentlemen. Gave you a bit of a scare.
Yeah, turning my hair gray. What the heck?
Yeah.
No
Yes.
comment.
No comments. It is hair. That's
Oh, yeah. I saw some hyperventilation going on.
still
there,
got
Gavin.
exactly. Well, thank you very much.
I
Thank
need
you,
a drink.
guys.
Absolutely. Me too.
All righty. Okay, so now, Gary, we are moving on to Metro.
Propose a 10-minute break as Chair
Right.
Bernard asked to wait for him to return for this session.
Okay, sounds like a plan. 10 minutes, 3 o'clock, we'll be back. Yeah,
He is not, so it's your call, Chair, if you'd like to wait a minute or two or get started.
I don't mind waiting a minute or two.
Okay.
I have no desire for being the chair for any length of time.
You're doing excellent, Vice Chair.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn off my video because I'm eating some snacks because I'm hungry,
fine.
but I'm here.
Okay, no worries. How about we give him till about another couple of minutes, and if Jim doesn't make it, maybe this was going to be an hour call. Hey, Gary, did he specifically request that we wait for him, or?
He did. He wanted to be a part of the conversation because he's our representative on this task force, so he had asked if we could wait. But he expected his call to be short. I texted him to see if he'll respond.
Okay. Let's wait till about 3:05, and I guess we can do this.
Jerry, would you like me to bring in the staff so they're?
Yes, please.
Yeah, don't bark anymore, you monster. Mm-hmm.
There he is.
All right.
Oh, okay.
What's up?
Well, we waited for you, all-powerful chair.
Yeah. So there wasn't a lot to talk about, except she wanted to explain why the masks. And so the rate of percentage of positives is climbing. Washington, Texas, I don't mean Washington, Texas. Texas and Florida had the same readings, and they didn't react, and consequently they're shutting down. So she basically wanted to just tell people that she needs our help to communicate that people need to wear masks, and as much as possible there will be enforcement. OLCC, OSHA, OHA, and others will be involved. She didn't really get to the money. That question was asked. I mean, I got some talking points that I couldn't use. But they're going to send us the presentation, which I think would be valuable when we do our videos, so that we can show people what's happened. She was on the phone with the White House today, and the news is not good, and she's very frightened that if she hadn't done this by the 4th of July, we would be up over the top and shutting down in a matter of weeks. So that's basically what the phone call was.
All right, Chair, you ready to go to our last policy session.
Yes.
All right, we have Metro Transportation Investment Measure, Get Moving 2020, revised letter of commitment, memorandums of understanding, and project description sheets. We have the team from Transportation and Development. I'm not sure who's starting, so Dan is starting. Go ahead.
Can't hear you, Dan.
I love when I do that. Good afternoon, Chair Bernard, members of the Commission. Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation Development. I'm joined with by Jamie Stastny and Mike Besner from DTD to share with you some thoughts around Get Moving 2020, review, letter of the commitment, and the MOUs. Before we do that, a quick introduction that I'm going to hand it over to Jamie. Understand the fact, or be reminded of the fact that this is a regional funding effort headed by Metro. Our work is essentially to collaborate to position Clackamas County to be as successful as possible should this regional measure pass. Does it align with all of our values? I probably would have to say no. But we have been successful in diversifying the projects within Clackamas County to meet a number of our needs, which are different than the needs of other members of the region. Just something to acknowledge, something to get out there. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jamie to kind of run us through kind of the more technical aspects of the presentation. So Jamie?
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to set up my screen share here. Just give me 1 second. All right. Good afternoon, Chair Bernard, Commissioners, and Administrator Schmidt. We are back again today. We were in front of you 2 weeks ago on the same topic, but we're back today to provide a little more context and background on the letter of commitment and MOUs that Metro is requesting. So as we shared 2 weeks ago, Metro is requesting that the partners sign non-binding agreements to affirm our commitment to support implementation of the investments that are planned in our county. As you know, we've been working on this measure and the components of it. Chair Bernard has been sitting on the task force for over 1.5 years. And this has culminated in a really complicated measure with a lot of different pieces. And I wanted to take a step back today and share with you how those pieces are really coming together and why we're being asked to sign this letter of commitment and these 2 MOUs. And also these new project description sheets, which are all attached to your packet. So there's a lot of information coming. I just want to kind of describe what these pieces are and why they're necessary. So the intention behind these documents are to affirm our commitment to being a good partner. If this measure is referred on July 16th by the Metro Council and then passes in November, then we will be good partners, we affirm, and we will deliver the projects or support delivery of the projects in Clackamas County. So I wanted to share with you these maps, and this is the map for McLaughlin. These are available on the Get Moving 2020 website, just to describe a little better what the context is and how these pieces are coming together. This is the corridor for McLaughlin. So you can see that there are 10 projects listed here, that the way they're broken down. We'll be responsible for delivering only one of the projects in the McLaughlin corridor, but we will of course be supporting and collaborating on the other projects that are going on because this project is in Clackamas County. So these project description sheets that I keep referencing and that are all attached there to your materials really break down for each of the specific projects, the project extents, the delivery agencies, the budget, and also the time frame for delivery, and then some basic project expectations. You'll notice, and there's a map, but you'll notice these are pretty high level. They want to leave a lot of room for flexibility because while a lot of work has been done to develop these projects, there will be extensive work to really refine the projects and do a lot of public outreach to get input from the community so that the projects can be catered and tailored specific to the communities that they'll be serving. So that's what these project descriptions are. So we have corridor map for Sunrise with 4 projects identified. We won't be delivering likely any of the projects on Sunrise since it is a state facility. We'll be working with ODOT and our partners there to help with delivery. So there are project description sheets that we've helped work on that are all attached there, but we will not be required to deliver projects here. And then for C2C, we've got 8 projects identified on the corridor. Some are in Multnomah, some are in Clackamas. We'll only be responsible for delivering one project here, which is the connector piece. And that new connector road, or project number 7, has a project description sheet that was attached there as well. We also have 82nd Avenue, which, as you know, about 20% of the corridors in Clackamas County. We will not be delivering any of the projects on this corridor, but we'll be helping, coordinating, collaborating on making sure that the projects are delivered the way that they are intended to be. So that's just high level information. Just want to give you a little more context about why we're being asked to do this and how the pieces are coming together and what they are. After we were in front of you 2 weeks ago, there were some questions about different pieces of this. And we had a conversation with your transportation liaison, Commissioner Savas, about the proposal, the MOUs, and the letter of intent, or a letter of commitment. And through that conversation, Commissioner Savas voiced some concerns about the draft MOUs, specifically 82nd and McLaughlin, which are the 2 MOUs we're being asked to sign, referencing high capacity transit studies. And I wanted to share with you that the materials that are attached here today are the same ones that we shared with you 2 weeks ago, but we did request amendments removing that language from both of the MOUs, and we received information from Metro staff yesterday that they will be removing the high capacity transit reference in those MOUs. They will be doing corridor studies, but they will not call them high capacity transit corridor studies. So they're just going to be calling those corridor studies. So I just want to share, we did have good conversation. There were questions asked. We have had swift response from our partners at Metro. And we're looking forward to continuing this work with them. And I wanted to mention quickly before we move on to questions that there is a listening session this evening. This is the Clackamas County listening session with the Metro Council. It's at 5:30 tonight. They're taking testimony. Chair Bernard will be providing testimony tonight as well. So I just wanted to share that that's going on tonight if anyone wants to join in. But moving back to the MOUs and the letter of commitment, just want to talk with you all to see if you have further questions on the draft MOUs and the letter of commitment. We are requesting that, we're asking that you consider signing these agreements, and if you so choose, could direct us to come back to you for the July 9th business meeting to consider these formally. So that is our request as staff, and I'll turn it back over to Dan. It looks like you had something you wanted to add, Dan?
Yeah, just to expand, Commissioner Savas had a great point in a dialogue around all the projects that were in Clackamas County. There were 2 projects that aren't in your packet, at least I don't believe they're in your packet, but will be benefiting Clackamas County as a whole. And that is the inclusion of the Portland Avenue Gladstone project in Gladstone, and then also the Highway 43 work that will also be included. So those are not necessarily projects that Clackamas County would be facilitated on. They're within cities, but they are improvements within the county as a whole.
And I just had one more thing to add. In the letter of commitment, there is language in there that makes it very crystal clear that it is a non-binding letter. There's a footnote. It says that quite specifically. So that's something else that we have added to it, wanted to point out.
All right, are we ready for questions?
Yes, please.
Okay, Paul first.
Yeah, so Jamie and Dan and Mike, you kind of know that I've been asking for more project definition as to these projects, because it's been vague for so long. And Jim, you've heard that, we've all heard that. We've had people on, that live in the, along McLaughlin, around McLaughlin in the area, asking about, they want sidewalks, they want this, all these amenities that they wanted. And clearly there was far more money committed by Metro on McLaughlin than there were projects. So, issues like shuttles and local shuttles to get the last mile, sidewalks, a number of things. And basically all the requests, virtually all of those requests that I'm aware of were not incorporated into the project definition. It just remained pretty much very vague. And Jamie, I don't see the slide that you and I we shared on Thursday. If you've got that, I'd love to show my colleagues that. And what in my search for more definition, I discovered that Metro has changed the alignment of what the McLaughlin corridor is really going to be. And there it is right there. And basically that is about, I just did some rough mapping of that. That's approximately 18 miles. Okay. If you go from Clackamas Community College at top of the hill all the way to the Clackamas Town Center in that route, you're gonna basically expend about 18 miles. The McLaughlin corridor is only about 8.5 miles, 8.5, 9 miles of what is still in the scope. So I'm at a loss. I don't recall, I looked at all the materials for T2020, Jim, that you went to. This alignment was not discussed. And my concern is that the change that until the Metro Council actually votes and puts in the ballot title, the ballot language, and commits to something, or doesn't commit to something, I'm just concerned. This is I don't know when this was actually changed, but this is a significant change, and I still don't have actually the project definition that I was really looking for all the projects. I mean, our staff did the best they could. Jamie, Mike, Dan, you did great work. I know there's only so much you can do, but it's the agency that's putting this forward where we're not really getting the definition. But I just thought, do you have any new information about this alignment? I mean, because if we're going to increase the corridor more than double in length, that's just less money for the projects along McLaughlin, and really all the projects that the community wanted aren't really going to happen anyhow.
We do.
Maybe parking structure will, and maybe a couple signalized intersections will, but the sidewalks and the shuttle and all those things to help the last mile to get people to the corridor isn't going to happen in this measure.
We do have some clarity on that I'm going to ask Jamie to kind of run through here in a second. But I will tell you that the change to that particular map was kind of a surprise for us as well. It does differ from the other maps because if you recall, I'm not sure if all the rest of the commission has taken the time to look at every single project description. There are different sheets for different aspects, but that particular one did catch us by surprise. So Jamie, can you kind of give some feedback about what we heard from Metro?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll just point out quickly to Dan's point. This is the safety project description sheet for McLaughlin. You can see the corridor map just runs along McLaughlin. And then for the ETC or enhanced transit, the map is different. And so Commissioner Savas brought this up in our meeting. We followed up with Metro staff, and they shared with us that they were considering splitting the bus lines that are existing there, which I believe is the 33 and the 99, into two separate kind of lines, and only funding one of them within the measure. When upon further analysis, they found that they could combine those and work to find a federal match to be able to do the entire length of the bus lines. So as you can see up above in the budget line, the measure will give $92.5 million to the ETC in this corridor, and that will be matched by $87.5 million of federal money to help enhance the transit amenities along the entire line, all the way from the town center to the community college. This was a change from the original plan, and that is why the map looks a little bit different. But the benefits that we will see are listed here in the project expectations. They'll have project enhancement to 90 transit stations. That'll include wider station platforms, bus pads, improved shelters, real-time information, travel displays, and lighting. They're going to have new bat lanes on McLaughlin. They're not going to be doing these big substantial improvements off of McLaughlin itself. It'll mostly be the station treatments that will be expanded to match with this alignment. So they're looking at adding also 16 new electric buses and charging infrastructure on the corridor, and that will serve the entire corridor. But the reason for the change of the mapping was so that they could match the entire existing bus line, including I believe it's the 33 and the 99. And that was a change from what was originally proposed, but they're able to do more improvements. Oh, yep, 33 and 99, it says right there. They're able to do more improvements with that federal match. So it actually helps, I think, add more capability to enhance what's already there and serve our citizens that are moving from Clackamas Town Center all the way to the community college instead of just on McLaughlin itself. And I just wanted to say quickly, I know that last mile is a big concern in that area. I've talked to many of the citizens that live in this area. They are concerned about sidewalks and being able to get to McLaughlin. And we will be working with them to try and figure out if there are programs within the measure that could be helpful to complete some of those connections. So I have heard that concern. I appreciate you bringing it up, Commissioner Savas. It's one that we've continued to bring up, but I think overall this is an improvement to the corridor and will help with connectivity and make it safer for people to move along, especially the students that are moving from the community college and people that want to get to the town center.
All right.
Yeah,
well, Ken,
I'll just end with this one point, and that is that what we have some major transit gaps in the county where we desperately need transit. And I just am astonished and disappointed to some degree that with all this money, that all we're doing is basically enhancing transit where we already have transit, and we're doing nothing for the areas where we have nothing or we have serious gaps. And that's where I have a lot of heartburn. What this area has been asking for years, decades, is better sidewalks and a local shuttle to get people to the transit corridor. And there's no dedication to that whatsoever. And a number of the projects and the areas that which are affected by them weren't driven by the local citizens and Metro responding. It was driven by what Metro wanted to impose upon us or deliver to us. That might be a little bit strong statement, but that's what it is. And that's why I have a lot of heartburn and have a significant change like this at the last minute without any notification. You know, it's still 2 months away probably before they put this on the ballot, and I don't know what else will change before then.
So Ken, and then I'm going to say something. Ken?
I echo Commissioner Savas's concern about the last mile aspect of this. But my other question is, it assumes a federal match of 87 and some odd million dollars. How firm is that assumption? And what happens if it doesn't materialize? Anybody?
That's a good question. I think there has already been some planning and conversation that's occurred. I do not know if they have formal agreements in place for that match. We can follow up on that question and get back to you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're planning these big projects and you're assuming funds from a source that we don't know that's a guaranteed source.
I would imagine that it would.
And if you don't get the 87 million, then what does that do to the project? Clearly, it reduces the scope of it dramatically.
I would imagine it would go back to what it was before they added that 87.5 million in.
No, well, and before what it was, did that include some last mile improvements?
No, it was the same scope, but just only on McLaughlin, not
Okay.
the full extent up the hill to the college.
So the last mile issue still has not been addressed.
Correct.
As a part of this package, yes. Jamie, can you take 2 seconds to talk briefly about the programs? Jamie or Mike, whoever wants to kind of dialogue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Metro has been working really hard just in recent weeks to outline, I believe it's 9 different programs that they're going to be putting forward. And they do have some programs that will help fund safety projects and as well as Better Bus. And I'm trying to think, they have anti-displacement program in the mix. They have downtown program in the mix. They have a bunch of different programs that they've been working really hard on to put together, but those programs are going to work like a grant cycle where you can apply for the grants and be able to apply them to specific projects in the corridors. So we're really excited, and we think there is some potential for maybe, I don't know if it would be a shuttle potentially that would be available through that, but I do think some of the sidewalk projects that the residents have been talking about could be added under those projects. So we are definitely keeping tabs on that, and we'll hope to be able to apply for some of those in the future.
Well, just as a follow-up, most people that I know, if they got to walk a quarter mile, They're not. They're going to get in their car, and you've lost them for public transportation. So in the final analysis, if you're going to add 16 buses on this corridor, but you don't have a way for people to get to those buses other than walking more than about a block or two, they're going to get in their car, and you're going to lose them. So it really is a critical issue that needs to be addressed. If you really think it's important to have people use public transportation systems, you don't let them get in their car. You've got to make it so convenient that they do not need to get in their car. Otherwise, once they're in it, they're going to drive it.
That's
In most
assuming
cases.
that's assuming they have a car they can afford to drive and they have a place to park when they get there. You know, I think the reason this is a lot of vague stuff in this is the fact that they're not doing that so the community has some input. It's not that Metro's going to jam it down their throat. They have some basic programs, some ideas, and some intersection sidewalk improvement ideas, and then they want the citizens to tell them where those are and how those should work. So the vagueness does not bother me. I like that they've expanded it. Like Paul said, I have no idea where they're going to spend all that money, but I think that including those will make the project much better. Again, I think the vagueness, there isn't a problem with that. I think that the only purpose of that is to allow citizen input. Otherwise, you could really say that Metro's jamming it down our throat. And so that's my feeling. We're no rush to do this today, but it is something that we need to, we're talking about. Martha.
Yeah, I am also kind of worried about suddenly the change of this scope. And Metro has not been known in that area for their stellar citizen communication work. So I think that's going to be an issue because I think that people might get upset when they see this. And I guess my question is, am I to assume that conversations about this money and lobbying at the federal level are already in progress with President Peterson and the Metro Council and staff? Anybody know?
Mike?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I think we said before, we're gonna look into that specifically. Again, the increase in scope is associated with them thinking they can get this $87 million in federal money. If they didn't get it, it makes sense to me that it would go back to the same scope they already had, which was limited to McLaughlin.
Which leads me to believe they are already negotiating. That's just
Yeah, I would imagine they wouldn't have put it in there if it wasn't already something they were working on.
And we are glaringly left out of that negotiation. Just making a comment. That's actually rather, and we do have to do infrastructure, that's not it, but it is rather disrespectful in my mind to kind of see this happen, and then I would have to assume that they're already talking to our federal partnerships about the dollars, because they wouldn't have done the drawing if they hadn't already been doing that. It's not our staff's fault that they're doing that. It's just the way they do things. And I guess the other question I have, so this is all going to be road improvements specifically for buses, because as I look at that, I also see more than likely conversations around light rail along those same corridors. So any hint of that anywhere?
Well, I think they're studying it.
Yeah, I mean, the only place, sorry, Chair.
No,
Well,
that's okay.
the only place that would come into play is in the corridor study item where it's going to do a study of the entire corridor. But there's no projects identified for light rail, other than potentially, the parking garage expansion, which is in the measure.
Okay. Well,
And what
that's
is
another.
what is TriMet's fundamental focus right now, Mike, for expansion? Before they talk about expansion.
For light rail?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they want to do the downtown tunnel.
Yeah.
Okay,
the
so
problem with
that's
the
going to
bridge.
be, that's their major focus right now. How is this going to affect the land use with the actual revitalization of that whole area? I mean, that's the other question I have. I understand roads are roads are roads, but
They shouldn't have any
What-
control over that above and beyond our current comprehensive plan.
The MOU
Really?
asks that we coordinate and collaborate with them on that. So as they're working on their improvements that they're going to be installing, that will work to help support them. But we will still maintain control of the land use along the corridors.
all right. I'm just wondering about the kind of redevelopment we want to see happening along there. And that just putting in, to me, having grown up in New York, urban areas, yeah, I've seen bus stops put everywhere and anywhere.
Yeah, I
Didn't
want to
exactly improve the neighborhoods, you know?
just to add to that a little bit. The MOU, we did give comments a lot on the land use language in there.
Okay.
And had it clarified that no one's committing to changing any land uses because we can't do that. And
Right.
so it doesn't do that.
And any change would have to go through authorization of this board.
Right. I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's not necessarily always it's not necessarily going to create nodes of community. Do you know what I mean? I've seen that backfire where I grew up. You know, you can actually start dismantling community, and those communities that are already there are going to be very vocal.
Well, the one thing we do know is Metro has been clear that's not their intent. They want to build places here. They want to build communities. They've been telling us that over and over. You know, they're still going to work out their anti-displacement policies for all of this. So they're saying all the right things when it comes to, we really want to make better communities and better places.
Right.
That's what I can tell you.
I know, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And there you go. Just saying. Listen, I'm not trying to give you guys a hard time. It's not you I'm worried about. Okay. I understand you got to work with people. Okay. And Metro is the power that be, but I would be very careful about.
All right.
What I see is the camel's nose under the tent, and after years of dealing with the monolith that is Metro. So anyway.
And I appreciate those comments, but I also want to do a quick shout out to Mike and Jamie, who have been knee deep in the discussion since day one. And you talk about a dialogue around their ability to get at least some projects that align with not necessarily all the goals, but some of the goals, and align more with our goals, namely C2C, some of the Sunrise funding. Has been amazing work, and to beat Commissioner Savas to the punch on the gentrification dialogue, we haven't seen a lot. We've been asking for it, but we haven't seen a lot yet. We're hoping to get more detail on that as time goes by. So
yeah, and thanks, Dan. The last thing I just want to say with these documents, again, as we've said before, our goal in this as staff has been to, if this measure passes, we wanted to fight to get as much in Columbia County as we could.
Oh, I think you guys are great. You're not the issue. I just have learned to be.
Okay, thank you.
Once burned, twice cautious.
So Paul?
Not you.
Yeah, well, appreciate all the comment. I just want to build on something that Ken said about the last mile or the quarter mile and that whole thing. I just want to tell you why it's even worse for Oak Grove and Jenny's Lodge, because that quarter mile or half mile or whatever it may be, it's uphill or it's downhill. There's nothing flat. That's why it's a problem. And it's been a problem. You can't change the topography. The topography is the topography. And that's why, whether it's West Lynn or Lake Oswego or Oak Grove or Jennings Lodge, the topography is the challenge. So a quarter mile is more like 3/4 of a mile. So you have to realize that. And it's a big deal. Now, I thought, Jim, appreciate your comments, but I thought the light rail was not going to be studied. So if the staff and yourself are the belief it's going to be studied, that's a whole different conversation. And I need clarity with that. And I don't know if we need another work session, but I'm not ready. I just can't do it. I just can't move forward with this. I do want to say that what the pieces of McLaughlin that projects are going to be assigned to, that is appealing to me and my community, which I agree with, is some intersection work, some safety work, and getting some more intersections between the long lengths. That would be great. Maybe filling in some of the sidewalk gaps along McLaughlin where there isn't. But the issue on McLaughlin for transit isn't that we need more transit. It just isn't. We know where we need it, and we're not getting any of it, period. So I won't beat that horse to death here any longer. So on the gentrification, Dan, thanks for stepping in on that. I have been, as you all know, I've been following that for a long, long time. I got the latest and greatest from them. There's not much there, folks. As Dan said, there isn't anything there. And I can't imagine why there isn't. As long as this has been, this dates back to when President Hughes was the president of Metro. He and I had conversations. I testified before Metro several times in this thing. Nothing is moving on this. So that's a big issue. And that's unresolved. What else do I have? So I have a question for staff. Dan, Mike, maybe you can answer it. If light rail is not going to be studied and there's not going to be high capacity transit planning required or needed, then why do we need an MOU?
The purpose of the MOU is just because it's a corridor with lots of different partners involved. There's ODOT, there's TriMet, there's Metro. That's why for 82nd and McLaughlin and other areas that don't affect Clackamas County, where there's multiple partners, Metro just wanted an MOU ahead of time. Again, the MOU is non-binding, and eventually one day it would get replaced with an intergovernmental agreement. But that's what they did there. For the corridors where it's a little simpler or there's a clear delivery agency, they just, the letters are good enough without the MOU. So that's the reason why there's an MOU.
Yeah, but there's not MOUs for the other projects though, where there is transit, where Metro still would be involved and TriMet's involved and ODOT's involved. So I don't see the difference between the two.
Well, there's no transit project. TriMet's not delivering any of the projects in the Sunrise or on C2C. It's clear delivery agencies. And so again, like on McLaughlin, where ODOT is going to be doing some and TriMet would be doing some, Metro just wanted to make sure everyone was going to work nicely together and collaborate. And frankly, on the McLaughlin one, because it's not our road, we're not delivering any of it. We're in there quite a bit, and Jamie mentioned earlier, as support. But again, that's the purpose of the MOU really, frankly, I think, is to make sure that TriMet and ODOT are just, spelling out who's going to be doing what and how they're going to work together. Because they might be doing, ODOT might be doing some of the safety work you mentioned. At the same time, TriMet's doing some of the enhanced transit work. They just want to make sure it's done in collaboration.
Okay, so to close the loop on the light rail, is there or is there not going to be light rail planning on McLaughlin?
My understanding is that they're going to be looking at the corridor and seeing what is the optimal transit solution for the corridor. They're going to be analyzing it more deeply to look at what is the most efficient way. Right now, what they're proposing is ETC. There could be more advanced versions of ETC that are efficient to carry people. They have not determined the outcome of that study, is my experience with this conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jamie. I think we're on two different planets. The planet, there's adequate transit on McLaughlin today. There's no last mile service. There's no shuttle service. There's no sidewalks. That's what we need. If they want to enhance transit, that's what they need. Light rail doesn't change that.
Commissioner Stavis, I wanted to ask you about sorry, go ahead.
No, good.
I was just going to ask you, the transit development plan that we've been talking about a lot, we're looking at analyzing kind of what's there and what we still need. I expect the outcome of that study to show some deficiency in that area that you're talking about. And my understanding is we'll be doing more studies of shuttles that could, be provided to answer that concern. So do you think that it's possible through that study and the outcomes of our analysis that we may be able to clearly articulate those specific needs and then advocate for those?
Well, I think what's going to come out, what's going to happen is you're going to identify that there's a need for the last mile service and sidewalks, but there's probably not a need for light rail. I think we know where the transit needs are. We've already seen the map. There's huge, vast areas of land in Clackamas County that's urbanized, full of housing and people and population with no transit. That's where we need the transit. And this measure is not doing that. That's the part that boggles my mind. That's why I'm struggling today. I really am. And I was hoping, not your fault, you guys are doing an awesome job, but lack of definition. And if there's flexibility for those monies to be used on a local shuttle and some sidewalks in the area and so forth, then why not put in the measure right now? Why not write it down right now? Not you, but them. Because that's not what they want to do. They don't want to give us what we need. They want to give us what they want to give us. And they don't want to give us what we need.
All right, Ken?
Well, with the chair spoke to the vagueness of some of this going forward. Saving grace is, as you have repeatedly said, it is a non-binding MOU, which means that you can walk away from it if you so choose, if your needs are not being met. So I'll go ahead and support it, but I want to re-emphasize Commissioner Savas' concern about that last mile issue and ask that staff really, when and where it's appropriate, make the point. They need to understand, if they really want to maximize the effectiveness of transit, that issue's got to be addressed. And a study you don't need a study to tell you need the shuttle. You don't need a study to tell you need sidewalks. The most you might need is a study to tell you we need a sidewalk here and a shuttle there. But I don't think we need to waste a bunch of money on a study saying, once again, something the community's already said, we need sidewalks and we need the shuttles. So I'll leave it at that. Again, because it's non-binding, I can go ahead and support it, and hopefully we can negotiate some additional sweeteners, I guess, for lack of a better term.
All right. Well, thank you guys for your presentation. And I guess we're no rush on this.
Well, I wouldn't say that, Chair. The Metro Council is going to be taking this up on July, was it 16th, Jamie?
Yes.
Yes.
And so our last chance to get this before you for an approval would be on the business meeting on the 9th, I believe. Okay. So that's what we were looking for today, is could we bring these documents for approval on the 9th?
All right, so I think I'm ready to approve them for now. And since they are non-binding, I'm willing to do that. So I'll make the motion to put these on you want to have a discussion or a consent agenda?
Well,
whichever you prefer.
Yeah, I mean, that's up to the board. I mean,
I recommend a discussion item.
Okay, let's put it on a discussion item on July 9th, business meeting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of revisions to be made. So we're not looking at the final documents either, right?
The only revisions would be swapping out the MOUs to reflect removal of high capacity transit, as I shared earlier. That would be the only change.
Okay, I will ask as soon as that's done, as soon as that document's final, I want to get a council review on it, legal review on that, just because the word commitment's in there several times. So it just seems to be kind of conflicting to say non-committal, non-binding, but commit. So which one has standing at the end of the day and which one doesn't have standing?
Yeah, we can do that. Know the fact that we have coordinated with county council on some of these drafts that you're seeing today, and we can continue to coordinate with them on the future drafts and revisions you'll see. So
I made a motion. Was there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right. Martha?
Yeah, I'm sorry I had to, my dog sitter while I was gone, I just had to run to the door to pay him. I'm going to vote yes on this, but I also believe that that as long as it's non-binding, but I think we have a lot of fun work ahead of us with these continued conversations.
Yep.
So, okay. All right.
So please poll us.
Okay. Commissioner Humberston,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
No.
Commissioner Schrader,
Time to go down the rabbit hole to Alice in Wonderland. Yes, aye. Okay.
Chair Bernard.
Aye. Motion carries 4-1. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What's next on the agenda, Gary?
That is it for policy sessions. Chair Bernard, did you want to do your commissioner communications from earlier?
Well, I kind of did it, but can I share what I have if I can figure this out, what was presented to us? So allow me to share. How do you do that?
You are a co-host, so at the bottom of your screen, there should be a green arrow that says share screen.
Okay, here. Now I just have to find it, huh?
Yes.
It just shows, just saw it here.
How do I get to?
Well, is it a PowerPoint?
Hey, girls.
I believe so. It might be a PDF now.
Well, if you send it to me, I might be able to.
Okay.
I have it. If you want to make me a co-host, I can.
Okay.
Okay. I've never done this.
Okay, 1 second. I'll do it, Jim. As soon as I'm a co-host. There it is. Okay. Share. All right.
Yeah, I just sent it to Gary, so that's good. So let's, anyway, this was just the opening slide. Go ahead and go down. This up, go down one more. One more, there. So this, you can see the progress of the virus and the percentage of positives. And in the beginning, you can see how high it was. And then we started to fall off, and now we're starting to climb. We're at 4.3%. And evidently, other states have seen this exact movement and did not take action. And consequently, they're shutting down, and some of them may be rolling back all the way. Don't stay safe. So that's an excellent chart that I thought we could use when we do our short videos about wearing a mask. I think we need to do that really quick though. And the governor is coming out with more public information on this issue. And she's probably on the phone right now with the chambers across the state to talk and ask them for help in making sure that businesses, ask people to wear masks. It's not going to be easy, and there are people who are going to be very frustrated. One of the comments one of the people made, which I thought was very wrong, and that is asked the governor if she had learned a lesson about protesters, that they're the reason this is happening. And actually, there has been very little proof that the protests have caused an increase. They're seeing it on holidays and events like Memorial Day, and they're going to probably see it on 4th of July. So it's very important. They're also, there's some things they didn't really talk that much about, but they want, restaurants, and I think that's what who they're talking to now, various associations, about making sure that the people behind the counter, that's the cooks and the dishwashers and all those people are also wearing masks. So that's really basically what she told us, and she would like us to be ambassadors to make sure that we move forward, and that there would be some enforcement, like I said earlier, but they're not going to arrest anybody and throw them in jail for not wearing a mask. Anyway, that's about it. I guess I would say one other thing that, I'm done with the slides, Gary, that on our calls with the tri-counties, we were originally going to do a joint news conference about how we're working well together and how we're going to move into phase 2 together. It's probably going to happen that we'll may move into phase 2 together, but two of us, our counties, have already sent a letter to the governor asking to be uncoupled. So we're not doing that joint conference. I would say that Multnomah County got a pretty good hunk of money, but they figure it's 75 to 95 million to deal with COVID. And because Washington County got a bigger hunk, I haven't heard that complaint. And again, Stephen talked earlier about the letter that AOC sent and to the Department of Justice about the restrictions and the requirements, and that the state's asking the MOU are beyond what the federal government requires. So that's my report. And Paul, and then Sonia.
Yeah, well, there's I know, Jim, you mentioned that the governor said that there's like $100 and something million left over, and AOC thinks that the number that needs to be distributed, I don't know if they necessarily said it was left over, but the number, the distributed dollars were closer to 500 million, maybe north or south, I can't remember which. So there's a big discrepancy there.
Yes, there is.
And and I'm hoping, in our letter said, it asked, and my letter asked as well, for the governor to step up the messaging so that people can just realize that socially we need to be responsible to keep this thing under control. I buy into the data. I appreciate you sharing the data. I'm still, and maybe I probably will not get a response from the governor, but I'm still wondering how, whatever day it was, where we were basically told we're not going to go into phase 2, and Marion County went into phase 2. Our numbers are better. We're better than theirs then, and they're better than theirs today. And we're surrounded by counties where our citizens and so forth, and our public messaging is working, and we're complying, and our numbers are good. But it's our surrounding counties that are not going to allow us to move forward possibly. And come that 42nd day, it's going to be 42 days before we were told 21. Now we're being tied together for another 21 days. So when we hit day 42, and our numbers are better than, if they continue to be better than the other 3 counties, not by a little, but by a lot. And we're held back. If we're held back, I'm not sure why we should be spending a whole lot of effort of messaging to some degree, when the messaging ought to be distributed in the other counties where it's not under control. So
you're preaching to the choir. You
got to realize it's very frustrating for people to abide and perform well, and know that we can't control the factors that are holding us back, which are not in our county.
Jim, you're on mute.
Sonia.
Yeah, so Jim, did she talk at all about, I know there's this big push because they want to really stop this surging and spiking. Did she give any indication as to how she's going to be looking at this in the future, or what her plan will be. Will it be a matter of moving some phase 2 counties back to phase 1, or will it be, partial shutdowns? Or does she give any talk about how she's looking? This is not successful in using the masks.
Well, I would say that the indication is she'll roll it back. And
Time frame, how much, what kind?
that very question was asked, and she said the virus is determining the time frame. I don't know if you heard out of the White House today that there is another virus floating around in the atmosphere that is worse. It's kind of a combination of 3 viruses that the federal government is tracking. And I don't know what to say. This is damn scary, man.
I haven't heard that. Any other?
Where can we find that, Jim?
Yeah,
That
where do we
doesn't
find
sound-
that?
Well, evidently, Dr. What's-His-Face this morning said it on the
Fauci?
news. Yeah.
Fauci?
Yes.
Huh, I'm looking at my news. I don't see it.
Yeah. Well, it was on TV. I don't know. Danielle saw it. I didn't see it. I was in a meeting.
Can we have staff verify that? I'd be curious to see what it is. I mean, because it could be mutating, or are they different viruses? That's my question.
It's a different virus.
A different virus, singular or more than one?
It's a singular virus, but it's a kind of a combination of a few viruses. It's worse than. Anyway, it's pretty frightening. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, well, I
Mother
think we
Nature.
Whoa.
Anyway, if there's nothing else, Gary, we will adjourn.
That is it for today. There's no business meeting Thursday because that's the day we recognize Independence Day here at the county. So your next business is Tuesday, July 7th.
And Christina just sent us the article on this new virus that Jim's talking about. It's in all our emails.
Okay.
All right. Have a happy holiday. Thank you.
I think we better not. I think we're on the road to close down. That's what I think.
I do too, unless people step up and wear masks. I would say we are, and this is scary. I mean, she says we already have a very damaged economy, and this will really destroy it.
Well, we could, like I said, if we could mitigate as much as possible, but I think that in hindsight, I think that we all opened up too soon. Not just us, I think the United States. I think that we should have just stayed the course, but we get a lot of political pressure. And our business communities are suffering. So if there's any way that we can not just give them relief, but there's got to be different paradigms of how we do business. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But,
so what are we doing with these PSAs? What's the protocol or process? Is somebody supposed to let us know?
I just brought this up this morning in our strategy. I believe it's strategy. And the governor said she needed help when I texted her, and she said, I need your help. I just thought it would be good to just all of us give the message, show that chart, say, it's not a political decision. It's a life and death decision, frankly. And we need to really adhere to that. Frank, I was at Fred Meyer's the other day. I'd say 95% of the people wearing masks and the others weren't. Frankly, I thought Fred Meyer should not allow them in. And evidently there are places. I heard somebody around the county, hardware store, they said, sir, you can't come in. The person knocked over the cabinet and left. So people are really frustrated, and they should be, but they need to work together, save lives.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Commissioner Humberston has his hand up.
Oh, he does?
I just had a question. Has
Oh.
anybody reached out to all the television stations and radio stations and done public service announcements there?
No.
I know the governor's planning on doing that.
Because we need, I mean, you literally need to flood the airwaves with it. And there are still people out there who do not believe the masks help at all. So that information needs to be reiterated over and over and over again, that they do help. They're not perfect, but they help.
Well, I watch the news every morning and they talk about it. Every morning.
I'm talking like, you know, the 15-second public service announcements that need to happen.
Yeah. I'm sure
Prime
they
time.
are. I wish we could get money back, or guaranteed we'd get our money back if we spent it, but we don't even have an IGA yet.
Hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. What?
That's all. Goodbye.
Okay, thanks.